So we're going to take a look at the track Kashmir by Led Zeppelin. It's all based around an eighth note groove played on the hi-hats. And we'll kick off with the groove at the top of the tune. If you listen to the original recording, you'll hear the bass drum, although on the first impression it might sound like it's just playing 1 and 3. Occasionally you'll hear it's definitely playing the first and second 16th note of beats 1 and 3. Occasionally though, that second note is a lot quieter, and to emulate that sound, it can be a good idea to play the first note with the bass drum with the full weight of the note, and then playing the second note with a lighter stroke, more coming from the toes, and it gives you that emphasis on the downbeat then of 1 and 3. So first of all, I'll just play the groove with 1 and 3, and then I'll start to add that second 16th note. And as you'll hear, it just creates that little bit more movement that you'll hear on the original. So once again, the bass drum is playing those two notes like this. So that second note almost gives you a delayed sort of effect. Okay, so let's look a little further into the tune. We have that same eighth note groove running up until the first bridge section, which then starts to work as a four-bar section. So let's take a look at that first four-bar section, which is really the first time we move away from that intro groove. So here's the first time you hear that in the bridge. Just a bit of 16th note kick drum action in the last bar of this section. So I'll play it through first of all, and then break down that figure at the end. Just to break that down, at the end of the second bar, we've got the second and third 16th note on the bass drum on beats 3 and 4, which would sound like this. We get that 3 times. The fourth time we hear that, we've got that classic triplet figure on the bass drum that you must have heard John Bonham play before. But also, along with that, the snare drum is played an eighth note later when you hear that. So here's how that sounds. I'll do the first 2 bars of that fourth 4-bar phrase. So here's that bar in isolation. You can practice that figure by just playing eighth note triplets between the hi-hat and the bass drum, so playing the hi-hat on quarter notes, like this. Try putting the snare drum in there as well to give it some kind of backbeat, so you get a feel for where that kick drum's falling in relation to the snare. And so you can hear, with a bit of work like that, you can get that kind of, the figure that you hear in that second bar. So I'll play that again up to speed. Onto the middle 8 now. And again, this is working in 4-bar phrases. And we've got some nice ideas, each time appearing in the 4th bar of these phrases. So we'll take these one at a time. So here's the first one. At the end of this second phrase, we've got that classic 16th note triplet figure moving off the snare and down the toms. Obviously, I've got 4 toms on this kit. We're just dealing with 2 toms, really. So going from the snare to rack tom to the floor tom in the 4th bar of this one. So here's how that sounds. Let's hear that bar slowly. So, firstly, just to think about the notes that we're playing, 4 on the snare, 4 on the rack tom, 2 on the floor tom. So the snare fill doesn't actually start on the downbeat of beat 3. So allow yourself to play the downbeat on the hi-hat and then start the fill. So here's the 4th bar of that phrase on its own. The 4th bar of the next 4-bar phrase is just a little syncopated idea involving the open hi-hat. Here's that 4th bar in isolation, and then I'll play it in context with the 4-bar phrase. At the end of the next 4-bar phrase, we've got another 16th note triplet fill, this time just based on the snare drum with a crescendo, because the crescendo leads us into the final 4 bars of the middle 8. So again, here's just the 4th bar in isolation, and then I'll play it in context. Okay, this final 4-bar phrase, we've got that classic syncopated snare drum figure that takes us back into the intro feel again. And that 1-bar fill will sound like this. And now I'll play it in context with the time before it and going into the intro feel again. As we head out towards the end of the piece, in the final chorus, in our 4-bar phrases here, we've got, again, most of the action happening in the 4th bar of those phrases. So, again, I'll work through them in isolation, and then I'll play them in their 4-bar context. So here's the 4th bar of the first phrase. We've got a variation on the groove in the 4th bar of the next phrase. Just some 16th note action on the bass drum. That's going to sound like this. At the end of the next phrase, it's some more 16th note triplets down the kit. This time we get beats 1 and 2 on the snare, beat 3 on the rag tom, beat 4 on the floor tom. And I'll play this going into the next 4-bar phrase as well, which ends with a feel that displaces the backbeat onto the end of beat 2. So I'll just cycle those last 2 4-bar phrases around. And one final feel you can just pick out on the fade out of the piece is this classic down the tom figure that you hear a lot in John Bonham's playing. And it starts with a simple move between the right hand and right foot, and it sounds like this. One thing that's crucial if you're going to play that figure is that the bass drum comes last. So slowly, just that triplet figure at the end. It just won't have the same impact if the floor tom goes last. So what you're after is this. And that concludes our look at the drum parts for Kashmir.